Alright guys, what's up? If you are here, it is not by mistake. This is the Ascension of Babylon. What we do here is we talk about the occult, we talk about spiritual self-development, and we talk about the healing process. And just jumping right into it, we are going to be talking about Santa Muerte. This is a very powerful entity, certainly one of the more powerful entities that exists, and she has had a profound impact on my life as well as the lives of many people. So Santa Muerte started manifesting around me, I would say about 3 years ago, maybe 3 years and some change ago. And, I was working through a lot of catalyst at the time. I was cycling in a lot of negative patterns and negative behaviors. And even though I did have the intention to better know myself, I did have the intention to better myself in many different ways. I didn't always necessarily know how to go about that in the most aligned way that I could. And not only was I experiencing a lot of catalyst at the time that was meant to kind of move me in a more aligned direction, but I was about to start experiencing a lot more catalyst. And I believe that Santa Muerte showed up to offer me the guidance that I needed to get through some of those experiences. And she's actually well known to do this for many people that tell their stories like I'm doing right now. So at this time, I was working with a lot of demonic intelligence. I was starting to move into some, I was starting to move into a primal layer of soul development known as clipothic initiation. I was working with all these different clipothic energies, and I was going through all these different internal shifts that I didn't really know how to process at the time, and I was moving into deeper and deeper levels of this initiatory process through the momentum that I was creating, working with all of these different primordial kinds of entities. There was an entire evolutionary process that was unfolding for me, and that was soon to unfold in a major way. And this is when Santa Muerte started showing up. So it started with my dog barking at a specific spot in the kitchen. This would happen more and more, and I wasn't as psychic as I am today, meaning like my psychic abilities were not as refined as they are now. So I knew something was there, but I just didn't know what. I knew without a doubt that my dog was barking at something, but I was starting to get very used to having a lot of spiritual activity around me, so I didn't know if it was an angel, a demon, a fairy, a ghost. I just didn't really know what it was. I knew something was there, but I didn't know what. But my dog would keep periodically barking at this specific spot inside of the kitchen. Then, out of nowhere, a friend was like, I think I saw Santa Muerte in your doorway. So as these little experiences added up over time, I came to the conclusion that Santa Muerte was appearing around me. And I started to build a connection with this spirit. And I didn't really know how to do that at first, so what I did is, I started utilizing little prayers that were out of a book, even though I've never really been a person to pray or anything like that, especially since, getting into the occult, which kind of cultivated a much different perspective of how the cosmos operates and how different spirits operate and stuff like that. I certainly wasn't praying to the demons that I was working with or anything like that. I was doing practices of invocation, calling them into my body with the understanding that there are these changes that I was going to go through. But with Santa Muerte, I didn't really know how to approach this being. So I started with like these devotional prayers, and this is how a lot of people connect with Santa Muerte. Eventually that led me to building an altar, and my relationship over time became much more personalized and much less about how other people connect with her. And, over time she started appearing in my dreams. I started having experiences where I was actually seeing her. I've woke up with her next to my bed. I've seen her in the doorway. I've seen her other times. There's times where I was doing rituals and I would like take photos of the ritual and we can actually see her on camera. And she's even appeared as well with Mictlan Tecutli. Mictlan Tecutli has appeared during these rituals in a form that's very clear. Most people can actually see this being in the smoke. It's a really cool photo that I have. So I say all of this to say that Santa Muerte will show up when we're going into a death cycle. Whether we know what a death cycle is or not, a lot of the time Santa Muerte will show up when we're going through that death cycle. And what a death cycle is you can compare it to a death cycle in nature. So in nature, we have winter and we have the fall. And then the life cycle is spring and summer. The life cycle is when things are growing. The death cycle is when things are, dying. The leaves are falling off the trees. The fall is preparing for the winter. And I think you understand what I'm getting at with comparing it to nature. The same way nature has its natural death cycles where things are kind of withering away and subtracting before the addition happens in the spring and the summer, we also go through that process as well. Before things can grow, things have to die. And then, when things actually do grow, death will always follow. It's just this cycle that we experience and that we see in nature. So we experience this in our own ways. We experience this in our thought patterns, emotional states, belief systems, our relationship to identity in different parts of us, our relationship to anything external in our lives. There's a time when things are growing and there's a time when things are dying. There's this level of subtraction that's taking place. So when we're experiencing this death cycle, there's going to be sometimes, or a lot of the time, heavier emotional states that start to come to the surface. As that death energy is manifesting more and more, there's a dissolving effect that also takes place within the psyche. And what's actually dissolving is certain identities that we've created from a space of unhealed trauma, and usually from a space of emotional avoidance. I'm this person, I'm always going to be this person, this is what I believe, this is what my parents have believed, I'm always right, and I'm a victim, and bad things just happen to me, and all of those kinds of things. Well, when the death energy is present, those identity structures and the beliefs and thought patterns associated with them, they get challenged, they get pressured, and they get inflated. They start to get dissolved. And because we form these patterns, behaviors, and the identities associated with them as a protective response to keep us away from wounded parts of us that are carrying heavy emotional states that we were taught are not safe to feel. Well, as the dam that we created is dissolving, the emotional waters of that dam start to come to the surface so we can be present with them, which is being present with these different wounded parts of us, to actually release the burdens that they are carrying. And this has a karmic cleansing effect to where we now have the opportunity to step into a whole new layer of our authenticity. We have the chance to now embody more of what we are because we've poured out the junk. We're pouring out the energies that would actually interfere with that process of filling ourselves up with more of what we are. So death is going to be a process of reduction. It's going to be a process of subtraction. It's going to be a process of course, dying. So there can actually be growth that takes place later down the line when we move into what I call the rebirth cycle. The rebirth cycle is when now we're growing, but it's the growth that takes place after the subtraction, after the reduction, after the death. So Santa Muerte is a guide into these death cycles. And she is actually a personification of what I like to call the death current. So the death current, in a nutshell, is a current of change. And there's different levels to this current in the same way that, all water is basically water, but there's different ways that that water, let's say, forms itself on Earth. We have a stream, then maybe a stream empties out into like a river turns into a lake empties out into like a larger body of water that we, might call an ocean, and so on and so forth. This is how I've learned to look at the death current. There's different layers to it. And although we all experience death, we're all connected to death. Not everyone is going into the ocean. Not everyone is meant to go into the deeper levels of the current, but all human beings are meant to experience death before they actually die physically. So Santa Muerte is a personification of this current. We can say she's like a gatekeeper of this current that can lead you through different checkpoints that lead you to different levels and different layers of the death current if you so desire it. And this is why she's known to show up when people are going through death cycles, when there's physical death in their lives, and there's grief and heavy emotional states and catalysts that are all a part of, death energy manifesting. They're all a part of the natural death cycle that we all experience to different levels to better know ourselves and to let go of what would actually prevent us from moving into the rebirth cycle where now new beautiful things are growing. Maybe we form a new sense of self-identity after the old one gets challenged and it kind of dissolves away. Maybe we change our relationship to the relationships that we have in our life. Maybe we actually go through different betrayals and letting go of certain relationships during the death cycle, and then in the life cycle or in the rebirth phase, we then manifest new relationships that are more so in resonance with our authentic self and the way our soul wants to express itself, versus maybe what those relationships were in resonance with before, being our protector parts and the trauma that is fueling them to keep us in negative karmic cycles with people. So Santa Muerte is a guide through this process, and this is why she will show up when people are going through suffering, when people are grieving, when people are kind of in this in-between unknown space and they don't really know what's happening, and there's a lot of fear and uncomfortable emotions and things of that nature. This is all a part of the death cycles that we all come here to not only experience as human beings, but we come here to experience in a more conscious way. Santa Muerte supports us in becoming more conscious of these cycles so we can have a healthy relationship with them rather than being in resistance to them. Now, there's different ways that people work with Santa Muerte. There's a lot of people that devote themselves to her as like a higher power. A lot of people pray to Santa Muerte. Some people work with her in connection to performing magic and manifesting certain things and things of that nature. I'm a person that I like to go much deeper than the surface level, so my connection with her isn't really surface level. It's more so in relation to primal soul development and getting to know myself in the rawest way that I possibly can. She's not something I use as a scapegoat or anything like that. She is a force that I work with as an equal. I have so much love for this spirit, and this is a force that has been guiding me through very deep levels of shadow integration. But some people work with this being in a much different way than I do, and that's okay. But I choose to look at Santa Muerte as an initiator, as a force that's here to lead me into the deepest levels of my shadow. And when we're talking about the shadow, we are also always talking about the underworld, what is underneath the surface of our conscious self, of our ego. What is in the underworld actually determines our relationship with our conscious self. And this leads us into Santa Muerte is actually a much older being known as Mictacasihuatl. So Santa Muerte is actually more of the newer re-emergence or personification of Mictacasihuatl, who is the Aztec goddess of death, said to rule over Mictlan, which is the underworld, and she rules over this dimension with her husband, Mictlan Tecutli. And I actually have a connection with both of these entities, and I'll probably do a whole nother video on Mictlan Tecutli another time. So Santa Muerte, or Mictacasihuatl, is a force that will, by nature, lead you into the underworld to the capacity that you can actually handle. Not everyone is meant to go that deep into the death current. Some people I would say, are meant to have a more surface level relationship with this spirit, to where maybe we can even say their relationship with her is a little more transactional, a little more surface level, a little more, I just want to improve my quality of life on the surface level, or I want support in manifesting this thing, or, I need something that I need to hold as a higher power above myself. And even though that's not the relationship that I have, or that I would even encourage you to have, I'm not condemning it. It is what it is. Some people are where they're at, and that's okay. Who am I to judge? But this is my perspective on it. But there are some of us that are actually called to go much deeper, and this is when Santa Muerte, or Mictacasihuatl, becomes a initiatory guide into some of our deepest fears, into some of our darkest desires, into our inner demons. So rather than rejecting our inner demons when we meet them in the underworld, we actually befriend them. We actually accept them. We actually integrate the parts of ourselves that are those inner demons into the whole of our divine awareness, so our system can start operating in a unified state, rather than us over-identifying with certain parts of us at the expense of other parts of us that we reject and we suppress, which is what keeps us in negative karmic cycles. So when we're going into the underworld, there is a karmic purification that is taking place, and there is really heavy levels of identity, ego dissolution that are also taking place to bring us into the raw core levels of who and what we really are underneath the mask, underneath the protective layering, underneath the identities that most people hang on to and most people do not want to let die. Santa Muerte is all about death and this deeper level of primal soul development that I'm explaining right now. And this is why, as Mictacasihuatl, she rules over Mictlan. Mictlan represents this process of deeper shadow integration and, karmic purification that all of us actually have the option to go through if our soul is ready to go through, that kind of experience. So Santa Muerte has been such an amazing guide to me. She has offered so much support. This is a very supporting entity to those of us that are in resonance with this force. I mean, there's times in my life when I was going through really difficult times, things that I didn't really know if they were going to turn out in my favor, in the end. But I did always come out on top of some of these experiences that I'm referring to now. And then when I had my doubts, Santa Muerte would manifest in some really obvious ways around me to let me know that I'm supporting you. I'm not babying you, but I'm supporting you and I'm guiding you, and you're going to be okay. And she would manifest in this way when I really needed that communication. So absolutely very potent energy to work with. There can be a much deeper initiatory process of soul development that unfolds when you're working with this force. In fact, she can show up to prepare you for some of the deeper levels of soul development that are available to us as human beings. She is a personification of the death current, and that's always going to involve growth through catalyst, through letting go, through emotional processing, and through deeper shadow integration. This is what I wanted to share with you in this video. I will be making many more videos about Santa Muerte because I just have a lot of experience working with this energy or with this spirit, with this force, and I have many experiences to share, which is something that I will be doing in the future. If you watched this video all the way through, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you later.